Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great, wonderful, what is this? This is the tax day, Wednesday, April 15th. That's right, tax day. So if you haven't got your taxes in, guess what? Don't worry. They've been pushed back. You don't actually have to get them in until like June 20th or something like that. I don't know. I have to look it back up, but yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on today's Coffee with Steve. I appreciate you guys coming on board and seeing what I have to say and why I want to say it and all that good stuff. I know we dive into a lot of different things like, we dive into a lot of different things like politics and religion and culture and programming, of course. We got to do some programming stuff here and there. So really, it's just kind of a mixed bag on the channel. Whatever I feel like talking about, whatever comes up on the news that interests me is kind of what I decide. And I kind of do it on a day-to-day basis. I don't know what I'm going to be talking about really until I wake up this morning. So, all right, today's topic is going to be on this is another political one. It's Donald Trump, and he's freezing. He's not withdrawing, but he's freezing the money that's going to the WHO, the World Health Organization, which is a UN-run organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Donald Trump. He decided to halt the funding to the WHO, which the WHO is not exactly, I mean, they have a purpose. I understand their purpose. It's to kind of be a nationalized global body that helps us identify and target when diseases from across the world might be affecting cross countries, right? So going from one country to another. Or just maybe even identifying and supporting those countries that don't necessarily have the infrastructure or support for healthcare. That's a really big one that I think gets often overlooked about what the WHO does is they typically help out the poorer communities, poorer countries that don't have a very good infrastructure. Think of, the more, the countries like in Africa, right? The poor Saharan desert kind of places. But there's plenty of other stuff that they do. Now, the thing is, the U.S. government contributes about $500 million a year to the WHO. And the WHO is based out of Switzerland, but it is a UN-run organization. And it's just kind of there's been this emphasis, as we know, on the part of Donald Trump to say, America first. We need to start evaluating all these relationships and partnerships and where our money is going to. And the WHO, especially after the coronavirus thing, has really become an easy target, shall we say. So I'm going to go through three different news articles that all talk about exactly the same thing, and I kind of want to show you. Yesterday I was talking about this website called All Sides, which is I think a fairly good, I wouldn't say it's a great arbiter, but it's fairly good idea of where center, left, and right news organizations sit. Although I still think that their center is actually a little bit more slanted left. I think it's a little bit more liberal in what they report. So, but they do have listed as a center agency the BBC News. Okay. So I'm going to start with the center news just to give you kind of like, and I'm going to highlight in here also where I think that they kind of inject some things in there that are clearly liberally biased. So, coronavirus U.S. to halt funding to WHO, says Trump. He accused the UN agency of mismanaging and covering up the spread of the virus after it emerged in China and said it must be held accountable. So yeah, there was, China kind of really wasn't very forthcoming about what was going on with the virus, and maybe they didn't have the supplies necessary to properly diagnose. I'm not going to get into that. I also don't want to get into where I actually think the origin of this came from. A lot of people are, the wet markets, and that's very possible. I'm not saying that what's out there is a lie. I'm not a conspiracy theorist kind of guy like that, but I think that there's an alternative that maybe I'll cover in another day of how this thing got started that is kind of intriguing, and we may see something fall out from it, but that'll be for another day. But anyway, he accused the UN agency of mismanaging and covering up the spread of the virus as it emerged in China, and it must be held accountable. And that's kind of, they're supposed to be the leading health organization, and they really kind of botched a lot of things. And I'll show you, there is like a timeline of things that they have done that I'll show you in another article where they kind of really botched things up. UN chiefs said it was not the time. So in response, the UN chiefs said it was not the time to cut funds to the WHO. So of course the UN is going to back up their agency saying, hey, this is not the time to be cutting funding. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Why would you cut funds to a health organization? Mr. Trump has been under fire for his own handling of the pandemic. Now, this is highlighted in blue because I wanted to highlight how this is clearly an injection of something that doesn't need to be injected into the article. If you are a news reporting agency, you should be reporting the news. Report the facts, okay? We don't need this kind of like, oh, by the way, he's also under fire for his own mismanagement. Okay, that may belong, if you're going to do an article on the mishandlings of Donald Trump, put it in another article. Don't put it in this. This is clearly color commentary to what's going on in this article and what the point of this article is. Okay, he has sought to deflect personal criticism that he acted too slowly to stop the virus's spread by pointing to the decision in late January to place restrictions on travel from China. So again, that is pure opinion. That is pure opinion. That he has sought to deflect persistent criticism. I mean, it may be factual, but where's the facts to support that, right? And why would you even, again, inject that into this type of thing? It may be tangential to this, but I don't see how this is relevant to the article and what should be in it. And that's just kind of one of the things that really bothers me about these news organizations that pretend to be center, that pretend to be middle road and independent, is they constantly inject crap like this. He has accused the WHO of having criticized that decision and of being biased towards China more generally. Quote, I am directing my administration to halt funding while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of coronavirus. Let me just pull up. If you guys have any notes, if you guys want to say anything, you have something you want to mention, go ahead and put it in the chat. In the chat message, the top chat, because that will let me respond to that. So if you guys have anything you want to bring up, please feel free to fire away in that chat. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. So criticize the decision of being biased towards China more generally. Yeah, I mean, and that is kind of a weird thing. Why they are they do seem to be a bit more biased towards China. The U.S. is the global health body's largest single funder and gave it more than $400 million in 2019. So in 2019, we gave him $400 million. I think we were on schedule to give him $500 million this year. And basically he's saying, why are we doing this? And basically this is going to be just a review period where we're going to freeze the funding. So we're going to give it a 60 to 90 day review to determine whether or not this is a good investment. And this could very well just be politics. This could just be him kind of playing to the base, because I think the base in general has a dislike to anything UN and globalized bodies that we're spending money to fund. So he very well could be playing to his base, and the funding, this could just be a play to say, oh, I too care about where our money's going, and then just kind of sneakily just giving them the money back. But I think that this is more of a negotiation tactic. If we look at the history of how Donald Trump operates, negotiation is kind of his thing. And maybe he's trying to get more bang from our buck, right? $500 million every year. What are we getting out of this? Because we're like supposedly, I mean, total number wise, not population percentage, but total number wise, we have been the most impacted by this virus, right? So, what are we getting for our funds if it's not protection, or good advice, or good prevention, right? And we'll see as we go through some of the timeline. The WHO really kind of botched a lot of the information they were passing out, and not to say that these are bad people that are running the WHO, or that are the doctors that are helping to do advising. They may very well have the best of intentions, but if they're not doing their job appropriately, we need to address that. Okay, General Antonio Gutierrez, who is the WHO secretary, or I'm sorry, the UN secretary. The international community should be uniting in solidarity to stop this virus. It is my belief that the World Health Organization must be supported, as it is absolutely critical to the world's efforts to win the war against COVID-19. Now, that's his opinion. And it very well, again, may be factual. Maybe it is one of the most important bodies in world efforts to win the war against COVID-19. But again, that's kind of color commentary. I don't know that that's true. I would like to know more about what exactly they are doing. Like, what are their efforts? Where is our money going? And that's kind of what I think is being done here. Is Donald Trump is putting on pause until we figure out what is this money for and how is it helping? Maybe not just Americans, but also how is it helping the world? And is it really helping us? Especially if China is the one calling the shots in the WHO, and we're the ones that are sending all the money to the WHO. Well, that's kind of legitimately a concern that we should have. Germany's foreign minister tweeted that strengthening the underfunded WHO was one of the best investments that could be made at this time. So I put this in blue because I think this is kind of, once again, just trying to, oh, look, here's another world leader, a foreign minister who disagrees with Donald Trump, is taking the exact opposite tactic. I don't, like, again, why is this relevant? Why is this relevant to the topic? I don't really know. The WHO launched an appeal in March for $675 million to help fight the coronavirus pandemic, and is reported to be planning a fresh appeal for at least $1 billion. So everybody has their hands out. Everybody has their hand out. What has the WHO been doing with our money and other countries' monies and Bill Gates' money for the last however many years? And by the way, yes, Bill Gates is the second largest contributor. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the second largest contributor to the WHO behind the United States. So, what are we spending this money on? It's a good question. And why should we just give you another $1 billion? That's okay. You mismanaged the money that we have. You gave us bad advice, but you want us to basically double it? Okay. Bill Gates said on Twitter, halting funding for the World Health Organization during the world health crisis is as dangerous as it sounds. Thank you for your input, Mr. Bill Gates. You are a smart man in a lot of ways, and I want to give you credit for that. But this is a little bit hyperbolic. I think, and this coming from me, I'm one that does speak also in hyperbole sometimes too. So, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the second largest funder of the WHO, which I just said. With the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have deep concerns whether America's generosity has been put to the best use possible, the president said. Yeah, we want to be sure that our generosity is being used to the best use possible. Okay. The U.S. has by far the highest number of coronavirus cases and deaths worldwide, with more than 600,000 cases and 26,000 deaths. So, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of numbers. And again, what are we getting for our money? Had the WHO done its job to get medical experts to China to objectively assess the situation on the ground and call out China's lack of transparency, the outbreak could have been contained at its source with very little death, he told reporters. Yes, there have been other pandemics that could have been, or I'm sorry, there have been other diseases that have been able to be halted relatively quickly because they were quickly identified and contained within their source. Now, I'm going to take Ebola, which was not the greatest of response, but when you consider how it didn't go to global pandemic range, right? It was definitely problematic, and we may not have had the best response. And WHO also got criticized for their response to that. But we obviously don't have the deaths on the scale that we have with coronavirus, and that's because of some of the quick work that people made of trying to get back to the source and contain the problem. Okay, this would have saved thousands of lives and avoided worldwide economic damage. Instead, the WHO willingly took China's assurances to face value and defended the actions of the Chinese government. Chinese officials initially covered up the outbreak of the virus and punished whistleblowers who tried to raise the alarms. This was well documented. Right? There were several doctors that ended up getting imprisoned and confined because they were releasing public notification on social media outlets that there was a global pandemic on the horizon if they didn't take care of this. And lo and behold, Chinese officials are trying to stomp that out because they don't want egg on their face. Quarantine zones on an unprecedented... So Beijing did later impose draconian restrictions, including quarantine zones on an unprecedented scale, drawing praise from the WHO, of course. So once there was a kind of known outbreak, then China's draconian measures of we need to quarantine everybody was something that the WHO praised, which, okay. Quarantining on the scale that China did would be difficult in America because we kind of love our freedoms. But okay, I don't know. I feel kind of... I don't like the idea that a bunch of people were quarantined in their homes, but obviously the effectiveness can't be denied. WHO experts were only allowed to visit on the 10th of February, by which time the country had more than 40,000 cases. So they were only allowed entry into China. The WHO was only allowed entry into China after China already had 40,000 cases. So clearly China really just screwed the pooch on this one. Really did a terrible job. And then, of course, just for some reason, they decided to throw this in here. Mr. Trump himself praised China's response to the outbreak and downplayed the danger of the virus at home after the WHO had declared a public health emergency of international concern. By the way, that was not called a pandemic at the time. It was just a public health emergency of international concern. So at this time, and it wasn't long after this that Donald Trump decided to, try to impose the travel ban, right, with China. But it's just weird how they throw this in, like, oh, by the way, he praised it. No, if you read the tweet, he's not praising the WHO or China's response to the outbreak, really. China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus, okay? So, yes, that's true. They've been working very hard to contain it after it got pretty large. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi. So the thing is, you have to understand the context of this. They had just brokered the new trade deal, the stage 1 of the new trade deal. So Donald Trump coming out and saying, you guys really screwed up, would be not the greatest thing for them to do. We're trying to reinvigorate the trade talks with China, and this happens, and yes, they should be condemned for it. And I disagree with Donald Trump's tweet here, but I don't know that we need to, and maybe he is praising him. I guess maybe I misspoke. He is kind of praising him in that they've been working hard. Yeah, but it's after it's been out. And it's sometimes you have reflexive reactions in the moment, and the information you're given seems to be good, and Donald Trump is like, maybe he doesn't have all the information, but you would think that the WHO does, especially when the WHO is essentially backing up what China is saying. So if you have China saying it, and then you have the WHO saying it, what do you think Donald Trump is going to be saying? Does he have boots on the ground in China to tell him differently? Oh, okay. So anyway, it's like third-hand knowledge. Like somebody does something, somebody else tells me that somebody else did that something, and I go, oh, okay, that's interesting. That thing happened. And then come to find out, no, it didn't really happen. Then you're going to criticize me because it didn't really happen. I mean, it's just kind of, I don't know, third-hand knowledge is kind of bad to begin with. And to ding him on the fact that he didn't know, and he was trying to praise based upon what the global, what everybody was saying about China's response. Anyway, moving on. So Chinese investigations had found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. Right? Back in January of the 14th of January, the organization, the WHO, they tweeted the Chinese investigations had no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. Boy, was that wrong. On the same day it declared a public health emergency, the WHO said that travel restrictions were not needed. Some health experts also say the WHO's guidance on the face masks has led to public confusion. Criticisms of the WHO are also it's constrained by politics and a sprawling bureaucracy. That is true of pretty much any government body and agency, right? The more power you give them, the more likely they are to bungle it and incorrectly abuse that power. But at another level, the move to defund the WHO is part of a broader effort by the Trump administration, but to curtail China's growing global influence. Could this be also part of that bigger battle? Yeah, I think so. The Wall Street Journal reports that the decision also stems from an ongoing decision on whether to link the U.S. aid dollars to the number of Americans working on the groups that receive them. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad thing to ask if our money is being used properly. I don't understand why people are so... I mean, well, I kind of understand, we're in a global health crisis. Don't pull funds now when we're in the middle of this. But at the same time, what are we getting for our money? That is never a bad question to be asking. And to be criticizing the president because he's asking that question is just like silly nonsense. It really is. All right, here's what the Huffington Post basically has to say. And really what this reads as a long list of doctors and editors that they could find that would criticize Donald Trump of doing this. That's basically all this article is. Leading health experts denounce President Donald Trump's decision to halt the U.S. funding for the World Health Organization amid the coronavirus pandemic. Trump failed to acknowledge his own refusal to take action on pandemic warnings. Failed to acknowledge his own refusal? Okay. Lawrence Scott, I don't know where that comes from, and there's no evidence anywhere in this article to support that statement. It's just a long list of people saying it's a bad idea, right? Lawrence Gosselin, a global health law expert. Ooh, that's a great expert to bring in to tell us whether or not there's going to be more deaths from this. Without a WHO that's empowered. Again, I don't understand the whole deaths thing. Like, if a virus is known to have a transmission rate and a death rate, well, I should say a death rate that is pretty stagnant. Like it's pretty much there. We don't have any sort of virus. We don't have any sort of drugs that we can immediately give a person that's going to cure them of this. So if there's no cure and the death rate is pretty static, exactly how are there going to be more deaths? The only thing that I know of would be the things like ventilators and beds, like, not having proper way to create an environment for yourself that you can heal. And of course, the ventilators thing. So how do they come to this conclusion that there will be many more deaths? it seems to me like it's probably going to be about the same number of deaths. Honestly, like until we can get a vaccine for this, or we find some sort of drug that can cure it, or at least make the symptoms, which, I mean, a lot of people are dying of the symptoms. So if you can find a way to and maybe that's the answer, right? Maybe that's where they're trying to go, but they don't state that. They don't talk about that. This is one of the things that drives me nuts is nobody's explaining exactly how this happens. They're just politicizing this. I could understand if somebody said, the reason why more people are going to die is because they do not have the healthcare to alleviate the symptoms, and we've determined that the symptoms typically cause death more than the actual virus, right? If we said pneumonia is a great example. If you can, if this disease is triggering pneumonia, and you do not have appropriate medications to kind of limit that infection of pneumonia, then yes, you have a higher percentage and likelihood of dying from pneumonia. And if that pneumonia was triggered by coronavirus, then there you go. That's how you could say that there are more deaths. But nobody is articulating that. And I can see that, but nobody is saying that. They're just saying, you're going to kill more people. More deaths. Stay home. Save lives. Like, nobody's explaining this. And that's one of the most frustrating things about this, is just people are saying, fear, 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 fear. And that's so, it's so dishonest. It's clearly a driver to get you to behave in a way that they want you to behave. It's a power move. It's a power grab. It's not an informational, right? We need more information. We need direction. We need guidance and information. We don't need fear-mongering. That's what really annoys me. Okay, moving on. Gosselin also predicted a further loss of U.S. global influence. Okay, sure. I mean, yeah, if we don't spend, $500 million on the WHO, maybe they won't listen to us. Oh, wait, they're not listening to us as it is. I don't know what kind of global influence it is that you think we're going to lose when we're not even the ones that are driving this thing. Richard Horton and the editor-in-chief. Oh, there we go. The editor. Oh, an editor. A crime against humanity, tweeting every scientist, every health worker, every citizen must resist and rebel against this appalling betrayal of global solidarity. Wow. Okay, Mussolini. A president's decision to make Americans less safe. Let's be clear about that. Director of the Global Human Health Program, Thomas Bolkin. The president's decision makes Americans less safe. Well, if the money is being redirected from the WHO and brought to America to the CDC or something, would he change his mind? No, of course he wouldn't. So here's like one of the little tiny bits of actual reporting in here. Dr. Ramesh Adalia, or Adalia, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security, told Reuters that the WHO may indeed need to be reformed, but it's not in the middle of the pandemic that you do that type of thing. And I can kind of agree with that. Maybe this is not the right time. Maybe it's just about optics and that sort of thing. But at least he's saying, hey, maybe it does need to be reformed, but maybe now's not the right time. Dr. Sanjay Gupta acknowledged the WHO made missteps, but warned cutting funds amid the pandemic would end up penalizing countries with weaker healthcare systems. Okay. American Medical Association president, I'm not going to keep going. I mean, it's just one right after another of, let's just trot out this person to make a statement. Let's take this tweet that some person made and glorify it, and since it's obviously against Trump. That's Huffington Post. What do you expect? And the last one that I've got here, before I jump into some numbers and stuff and a timeline. This one comes from the Washington Times, which is considered a slightly right of center, but it is probably the most center reporting and actual reporting that is done on this whole thing. And this is what really kind of annoys me, is that when you go center right on your news organization, your news reading, you typically actually get the center. You typically actually get some reporting. So if you look at, you'll see it's kind of, and again, I put out in red kind of where I see that there's a bit of some stuff that's more conservative leaning. President Trump said the U.S. will stop funding the World Health Organization while his administration reviews the role of mismanaging the coronavirus. Okay, there's nothing slanted about reporting what Donald Trump said. U.S. contributes up to $400 million, while superpowers like China closer to $40 million. Okay, maybe I was wrong. I thought it was $500 million, but I misread. It's $400 million. Quote, the United States has a duty to insist on full accountability. And I wrote this in red because it's not being challenged by the article. It's just Trump saying what he said. You could put this in yellow because they're just reporting him, quoting him. What he said. The United States has a duty to insist on full accountability, which is not wrong, right? We're giving you this money. What are you doing with it? He cited the WHO's lack of pushback on Beijing's foggy reporting on the virus. It cost the rest of the world valuable time. Again, I don't think he's wrong. Foggy reporting on the virus by both China and the WHO caused valuable time, right? We could have had a stronger reaction to this and maybe even had a cooperative effort with China. God forbid we cooperate with China on something like this that could help them, and then maybe gain some partnership there, right? Like that's how you build friendships, is that you tackle issues together as a team and don't just butt heads strictly economically and militarily. All right, you cited, the WHO's opposition to bans on travel from China and of putting political correctness above life-saving measures. Okay, and that's a bit hyperbolic, maybe, but also might be actually true. Maybe they did put some political correctness above saving some lives. But somebody could argue, so did he, right? Kind of so did he when he did that tweet that says, oh, good job, President Xi. Okay. Countless more lives could have been saved. Instead, look at the rest of the world. Again, where does that come from? I still don't know. I can hypothesize where I think that's coming from. But I just don't like this, save lives, save lives, save lives. Okay, how? What exactly, how does this save a life? He said U.S. funding wasn't put to good use and the WHO failed to vet and share the information in a timely fashion. Funding wasn't put to good use. And that, again, might also... I'm going to leave it in red because, again, I think it is a bit of a conservative viewpoint of the WHO. But Donald Trump said that the freeze will last 60 to 90 days and should have been done by previous administrations. And that's probably that's probably quite correct. Maybe like some evaluation of what's been going on with our money should have happened, especially since this occurred. How did this occur if we're spending so much money on them? Hey, Parasio. All right. This is an evaluation period, Mr. Trump said. And that's kind of the thing that I really want to point out is this is just an evaluation. Like it's just a time out. Wait a minute. Hold on. We're already, like the U.S. is in already dire financial straits. We're spending, depends on which figure you look at, between $2 and $6 trillion on trying to keep our economy afloat and keep the people basically alive in our healthcare systems and our state governments and all that going on. Why do we need $500 million going to the WHO? We kind of have a need here at home. That's kind of a thing. And I don't think this is an isolationist thing. People who claim Donald Trump as being an isolationist don't understand. Like, clearly he's not. He's more about, like, where's the funding actually going? What topic can you answer? Are you answering about science? I don't know a whole lot about the science behind the coronavirus, other than I know that it is a variation of a couple of cold strains. The COVID, so it was actually originally, the WHO had a COVID SARS-2. So this is basically labeled SARS-2. The virus does have an easy transmission rate. It's very easy to transmit between people, although the numbers are kind of weird. People have done different studies. 6 feet is kind of what they're articulating now for us. in America to stay 6 feet away from people. Although um, it the weird thing about that is if I'm wondering if that's not like just breathing. I don't know that that's just breathing. Like if I breathe in, breathe out, is my breath going 6 feet out with this virus? I think it's more like if you cough, then there's a 6 foot diameter. And then you want to be obviously away from that. And then the other thing is like this it is something that remains in the air for a long period of time, much longer because it's a very very tiny particulate. It's one of the smaller ones that we've encountered, which is one of the reasons why it doesn't just drop down. Right? It's able to stay in the air and stay aloft for a longer period of time, which is part of the reason why they think it has such a high transmission rate. In Because if you breathe in an area and then somebody else walks through that area, because it's aerosoled, because it's in the air, it's potential transmission just because you walked through some place that somebody else breathed. So that's kind of why the masks and everything. The second thing is the masks. One of the more common things that you'll hear is that masks are to prevent you who are infected from spreading your disease to everybody else. And that's another problem is this has a 2 week incubation period by some measurements, right? So some people, it takes up to 2 weeks before they start actually showing signs of having the virus. So with that 2 week incubation period, that means you can have it and you can be transmitting it to people for a solid 2 weeks before you know that you even have it. So if you're not wearing a face mask and you have it, you're potentially transmitting it to everybody. So the masks are actually not about protecting yourself from getting it, but protecting other people from getting it from you. That's kind of the big reason why that is. Now, the face masks thing, the what is the N94 or N95? I forget exactly which designation it is. But it captures smaller particulate, which is why they're recommending those particular face masks. The thing is, not all masks are made the same, so you need to be careful about which masks you're getting. Parasaya says, Trump is the worst president. I want Trump to see being impeached. Okay. I understand your opinion, and that's cool. And I would love to have a conversation about you with that. I agree that Trump is a terrible president for different reasons than you probably do. I don't know that he should be impeached. In fact, I think that this should be a case study for why we need to limit the powers of the presidency. I don't think that it should be. I don't think our government should have so much power that it really matters who's in office. That's basically my opinion. I want the worst president ever to be perfectly acceptable in the system. That's how the system should operate, is that the worst person you can imagine is able to be in the system and it doesn't make a difference. That's the ideal system, right? It doesn't matter who's at the helm, just as long as there's a system in place and it keeps running. But I do believe that there are reasons to impeach things. I don't believe the Democrats are going to successfully get him impeached, although they're going to certainly try again after he gets reelected. I think he's going to be reelected. I don't see any way that Uncle Joe gets back in. But this is kind of diverting topic. Para, I would love to have that conversation with you a little bit later. And if you have more to say, feel free to go ahead and fire away on the chat, and I will respond. But I'm going to get back to what's going on with the WHO. He said he will channel the money to the areas that most need it. So this is the thing. We got an evaluation period that he wants to do, which I kind of understand. Again, maybe this is the wrong time to do it, right? Maybe it became the focus, and maybe it's entirely because he wants to deflect, as the Huffington Post said. He wants to deflect his own away from his own failings. Okay, and by saying, okay, the WHO, we need to evaluate the money that we're spending on this. That's not a bad thing. We should be constantly evaluating where our money is spent. So that's not a bad thing. And anybody that's digging him on the fact that he's wanting to do this evaluation, I think they're severely misguided. And we should be channeling the money into the areas that most need it. And it seems to me that right now, America needs the money. right? We just spent maybe $6 trillion on saving our economy, possibly another round coming. We've got our own healthcare system to worry about. Does it make sense to keep shipping this money overseas to organizations that listen to China, that are doing China's bidding? That's a good reason to be saying, hey, wait a minute, before we send this money over, what exactly are you doing with it? Because we kind of need it at home. Okay, Mr. Trump's decision to cut off funding to the public health arm of the UN in the middle of the pandemic is sure to raise eyebrows. President may resume funding after sending powerful letters to the organization and discussing it with other nations. I don't know what powerful letters. He's going to write a speech to them, I guess, in letter form. Mr. Trump frequently criticizes multilateral organizations that cost plenty of U.S. money. And that's where I think this is a good point. He's been doing this ever since he got in office, of looking at the organizations that we are funding and spending money on and trying to evaluate or renegotiate. And if you understand that's his whole thing. That's his whole shtick, is the art of the deal, right? Making new deals. So he takes these bombastic and drastic positions that sound outlandish and completely counterproductive, so that it's the complete opposite and makes the other side kind of fear, what's going to happen? We need to come together with him, and in the middle, somewhere in the middle is where the bargain is struck. And that's what he does. That's what pretty much any deal is all about, is one side wants this, the other side wants that, and then you come to the middle, right? That's kind of compromise. But do you do it on the question, if you do it in good faith, it can be done easily, right? When it comes to two parties that have good intentions at their heart and want to work together, that's great. But in politics, that's not how it works. We all know that you can't just get two people in a room and, from different parties, get these two parties from each side and they'll just work it out. That's not how it works. Politics is like a drop-dead, cutthroat, dog-eat-dog system. So with Donald Trump, what you have is somebody who is used to that kind of argumentative situation. And so he takes really drastic stances on things so that eventually somewhere in the middle is where you get. And so I don't look at what Donald Trump says. I try to look more at what he does. What he says is almost always going to be way, way, way extreme. And then what it ends up coming out of it is almost always right somewhere in the middle. So that's kind of where, I don't know. If you understand that dynamic, then a lot more of this stuff makes more sense. And you'd start to look at Donald Trump not as like this bombastic, egotistical guy, which he is definitely a lot of that. But you don't necessarily always see him in that light. You see a lot of these things not as the ego, but as the bargaining chip that he's going to try to come to the table with, okay? Mr. Trump frequently criticizes multilateral... Okay, I already said that. Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi struck a phase 1 trade deal earlier this year. And this is the key reason why, again, I think the tweet that he said praising, President Xi and China's response, I think that's where a lot of this comes from. He didn't want, this is just fresh. This just happened. You don't want to then turn around and criticize the people you've just been working with. Okay, that would be a really bad thing, especially if all the evidence you're getting also from the WHO and other parties is saying, oh yeah, they're doing a good job responding to this. What is he going to say? I don't have any information to counter this, but I think that they're wrong. No, he's kind of going with it. China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. So this is the tweet, right? China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus, and the United States greatly appreciates the efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi. Okay, so that was a tweet that he sent out on January 24th. Again, this was before we knew that there were failings by the WHO and that China was not responding properly. Okay, so he's doing this, and then we find out later, hindsight's 2020, oh wait, they actually screwed this. They botched it pretty good. Mr. Trump responded to a question about his praise indirectly, pointing to his trade deal and need for Mr. Xi to live up to it. Okay. Trump decided to ban foreign nationals who've been in China for over the past 14 days from entering the U.S. That was 1 week after this tweet. So he did immediately, like within a week, he's like, oh, wait a minute, we need to do a travel ban. Though critics say he squandered that time by failing to set up a robust diagnostics program and supply chain during February. Now, hold on here. What kind of actual power do you think the president has to set up a supply chain and robust diagnostics program? Now, I'm not saying he couldn't have advised. I'm not saying he couldn't have helped coordinate. But he doesn't have the authority to just say, okay, those trucks over there are now forced to go over there and haul this stuff. He doesn't have that kind of power. He only has the powers granted by the federal government. So that's a bit of a weird... And my overall opinion is, again, I want Donald Trump to be as inconsequential to this thing as possible. So any criticism that's thrown about what he did or did not do is not going to stick with me. Because it's up to the local city and state governments to figure out what's going to happen within their local region. Okay? I believe that the power of the states is more important than the power of the federal government. That's where we should be looking. They know best how to handle their population. They know best what the resources are that they have and what they need. It's not up to the federal government to do that for them. So anything that you throw at what Donald Trump did or did not do is not going to work with me, because I don't think that that's his role, and it shouldn't be his role. We don't have a king. We do not have a dictator in charge. Okay? He's not the guy that's supposed to be doing all of this. It's supposed to be up to the local administrations, the local communities to figure this out. And in my opinion, the closer you get to the actual citizen making these choices, the better, right? Instead of even the state or federal government. Like, they should just be outlining guidelines. Here's what we suggest you do. Here's what we suggest you do to take care of yourself. Here are things that we would like to see the businesses do inside their companies in order to prevent the transmission of this disease. Not these draconian, everybody needs to shut down right now. That's China. That's Chinese. That's socialism. Okay, the critics say he squandered the time. Okay, yeah. Senator Jeff Merkley, Oregon Democrat, said multiple failures at the national and international level led to the problems in the U.S. is facing now. But he said America needs to keep its seat at the table in global talks. So basically the argument is, don't just take away their money because we need a seat. If you just take away their money, we're not going to be able to talk to them. Who really believes that? Who believes that? Do you really think the WHO is just going to kick us out because we stopped funding them the $500 million? Clearly, other states are able to spend like $100,000 in being the WHO. So exactly which seat are we giving up? Because we've limited or reduced the amount of money we're spending. It's critical that the U.S. is at the center of the discussion, not on the sidelines, as the international community determines what path the World Health Organization takes moving forward. Cutting back on America's support and involvement will mean that the United States does not have a full seat at the table during these discussions and will only magnify the already troubling influence of China at the WHO. Okay. He just said in this one statement, he said that we will lose power and China already has power, despite the fact that we are spending like 10 times as much money on the WHO as China is. That undercuts his argument. If China can spend 1/10 the amount we are, and they have more power and influence than we do, what has money got to do with it? What does money have to do with our seat at the table? No. Negotiation, the ability to negotiate. If you understand that is the perspective, that is the tactic, then you start to understand what's going on here. Additionally, the activities that are most needed right now to reopen society, global disease surveillance, information sharing, and technical assistance for testing and contact tracing, are exactly the activities that the WHO exists to help coordinate, he added. Backing away from the WHO at this moment will inflict great damage on the United States as well as the international community. First of all, back tracing, you might as well forget it. We're already at the stage where this is just socially transmitted. There's no amount of back tracing that's really going to solve this, okay? If it was a small outbreak, it might still be possible. Like if you look at how South Korea contained this, how South Korea managed it, they were very diligent about finding it and backtracing right away, like right away. But now that it's already grown to this size, that's really an impossible task. Okay, so that's what I think is really more central. Like that's a more centralized. Although there are a couple of items in here that are definitely more conservative based and not necessarily immediately backed up. They're just kind of opinions being touted. But most of those are expressions of what the president has said, not necessarily of the writer of this column. So that's kind of where I'm like, this seems more neutral to me than what the BBC did here, where they basically just like kept injecting all of this opinion inside of the article. All right, the last thing I wanted to do was point out here is the top 5 countries and organizations funding the WHO total contributions in 2018 and 2019. So there you have 893 billion. So basically almost $900 million over the course of 2 years that the U.S. has spent on the WHO. It's second only to Bill, or first, or in second place is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? So Bill Gates, who has been on this tear lately of, basically saying we need to back the WHO for everything, and Donald Trump is wrong, and is a devout Democrat. He's donated so much money to the Democratic Party, it's unbelievable. But yeah, so supposedly the United States, the UK, GAVI Alliance, which I'm not entirely sure who that is, Germany. Notice China is not anywhere on this chart, not even in the top 5. And yet they're able to essentially dictate what the WHO is saying. And let me just show you here. So here's just kind of a timeline. December 31st, China first reports a cluster of unusual pneumonia cases in Wuhan to the WHO. WHO tweets about a cluster of pneumonia cases in Wuhan with no deaths, saying investigations into the cause are underway. The WHO issues its first guidance on pneumonia of unknown cause, saying there are a total of 44 patients and 11 in severe conditions. Main symptoms are listed as fever, with a few patients having difficulty breathing. The WHO says there is no evidence of human-to-human transmission and that no healthcare worker infections have been reported. Mind you, Chinese doctors were trying to say, yes, this is going to become a pandemic. This is an outbreak. I'm scared for my life because I'm going to probably get it. There were doctors trying to do that. Okay, China says it identified the cause of the pneumonia as a novel coronavirus initially named 2019 nCoV by the WHO. The WHO praises China for identifying the new virus in a short space of time and repeats its assessment that the virus does not transmit readily between people. This is on January 9th. They reassert it. Also advises against travel or trade restrictions. Advises against travel or trade restrictions on China. This is not, by the way, this is not some conservative news, conservative leaning news organization. This is the Daily Mail. Okay? January 13th, WHO says it's now working with authorities in Thailand after reports of a case there and may call a meeting of the emergency committee. January 14th, the WHO tweets saying there's no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission in China. Once again, we're January 14th. They're still saying. So we're really, I know they're first reporting it, but it was sometime in November, actually. I think they determined that the first case was actually discovered. So we're a full, almost 2 months out since it was started. And we're still saying no evidence of human-to-human transmission in China. And by the way, keep going to China. There should be no travel ban. It says there may have been limited transmission via family members. Okay. WHO's field team in China conducts a brief field to epicenter in Wuhan. Now, just understand that if the virus had been understood to be easily transmitted, which we now know, and be able to be in aerosol form, which we now know, do you think that the WHO would have been saying this stuff? Obviously not, right? They would have been, you need to stop like if we could have said all the way back in January, early January, wait a minute, something is going on in China. Don't go there. Don't accept patriots from, or don't accept people from China. It probably would have at least limited, at least to certain regions that we might have been able to then send in people to kind of help with the smaller portion before it became an outbreak and a pandemic. The first case is confirmed on U.S. soil. Oh wait, here we go. WHO's field team in China conducts a brief field visit to epicenter of Wuhan. So it isn't until January 20th and the 21st where the WHO actually says, okay, we're going to go investigate. And I think that was because earlier we read that China wouldn't even let the WHO until then. So I don't necessarily blame the WHO for not being allowed in, but clearly China did something, and WHO like consistently just saying, oh yeah, we're fine with whatever China's telling us about this. Yeah, that's cool. A report from the WHO team sent to Wuhan notes human-to-human transmission is taking place, but says more research is needed to assess the full extent. The report notes confirmed infections in 16 medics, a clear sign of transmission from patients. Yeah. The team recommends avoiding large gatherings, isolating infected people, and a focus on washing hands is the best way to combat the virus. With the emergency committee split, Dr. Tedros says he has decided not to declare the virus a public health emergency of international concern, referencing the lockdown of Wuhan, which is announced the same day. He says he hopes it will be effective and short in duration. He praises China's cooperation and transparency in tackling the virus. Now, maybe he's under some other economic or political, pressure to make these kind of statements, but clearly this is false, and we're already in January 23rd, nearly a full month after China has even expressed that there's something. Okay? Dr. Tedros further says that there's limited evidence of human-to-human transmission, mostly among families or doctors treating the virus. Boy, was that ever wrong. Dr. Tedros and other senior WHO officials meet Xi Jinping in China, agreeing that a panel of experts should be sent to monitor the outbreak. He praises the seriousness with which China is taking the outbreak, especially the commitment from the top leadership and the transparency they have demonstrated. Really? I mean, this is now almost outright bald-faced lying, right? This is lying. And we're spending $400 million so this guy can go do this. Yeah, maybe we should think a little bit about where our money's going. Just saying. All right. I'm not going to continue on going through this. I will post the links to these articles in the comments section, in the description a little bit later on. It's definitely worth a read to go through this timeline and just kind of see exactly where the WHO kind of screwed up. But I think the point is pretty well made. There's a good reason why we should be concerned with where our money, like look at the amount of money we're spending on this. Obviously, compared to other endeavors, other things that we're spending money on, it's kind of a drop in the bucket comparatively, which is sad. But yeah, we definitely should be concerned with exactly where is this money going. There's no reason we shouldn't be concerned with that. And especially in a time where we ourselves are kind of going through a financial crisis trying to deal with this, this is not the best time to be spending money on a group of people who are clearly have some sort of pressure to continue to put China in a good light. And the president himself also has some of that pressure too. So, I mean, he's kind of in a compromised position there because we're trying to work out a trade deal with China. But yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. We should probably consider, hey, wait a minute, where is all this money going? Why is it that we can spend all this money and have such little influence on this? China can basically lie about things, And then the WHO backs them on that, and we're paying for that. And China doesn't have near the influence that we do. China doesn't have near the money, financial incentive that we do for the WHO. So, yeah, I kind of applaud this, but also I do also agree maybe now is not the right time to do it. It seems a little bit on the political expediency side. I'm not sure that this is exactly what we should be doing at this time, but I think there's a good argument to be made that it is. That, we need this money. It's our money. It's the money. It really is our money. Like us, the people of the United States. Where is our money going? We should be concerned with that. And the fact that this hasn't been looked at before, and Donald Trump also, is just as he's the one for the last 2 years spent this money. So the fact that he didn't do it before is also concerning. Not just prior presidents, but also him. So I mean, he's really just as culpable. But it is time that we do it, and maybe it's just the fact that there's a spotlight on the WHO at this time of crisis that is finally drawing the attention that it deserves. That's typically what happens, right? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. But basically, I do agree with the overall premise that we need to do the investigation. We should probably take a look at and see, wait a minute, hold on, where's the money going? I also understand and agree a little bit with the concern that maybe now is not the right time, but I want to know what our money is being spent on. Like, if you're going to tell me it's going to save lives, how? How is this money going to save American lives? Give me that. Okay, I understand other lives. I do care about, obviously. I want to know that it's going to help people in Tanzania. I want to know that too. But I also want to know, like, what are we getting for this money? How are we saving lives with this money? And if you can explain that to us, great, then fine. Then we'll give you the money. We'll go ahead and do that. But to just blindly write you a check and say, here you go, use it how you want to, that's not good policy. And once again, if you look at if you look at Donald Trump, what he's been doing through the prism of he's just negotiating, then it kind of makes more sense, right? All right, this has been a really long stream. This has been over an hour.